G'day, it's Jamie, and welcome to Where's My Yowie. Today, I'm reading an old newspaper article about escaped convict William Buckley, so we'll get into it. This was published in Sydney's Globe on Wednesday, the 3rd of July, 1912. Titles: William Buckley, the Wild White Man. Strange story of an Englishman's life in early Australia. How association with Aboriginals caused him to forget his native tongue. Few stranger stories are told than that concerning the sojourn of William Buckley for a generation with the Port Phillip Aborigines. Had Buckley been a man of intelligence, his story would have made a romance on par with the classic Robinson Crusoe. But unfortunately, though, a giant of a man, 6 feet 5 inches in height, and proportionately strong, he was mentally dull and unobservant, caring only for the most sordid of life's creature comforts. Buckley was born at Macclesfield, Cheshire in 1776. After serving a portion of his apprenticeship to the bricklaying trade, he enlisted in the Cheshire military, being thence drafted into the 4th Regiment of Infantry, known as the King's Own. By a peculiar coincidence, it was a detachment of this same regiment to which he acted as interpreter after his 32 years of Aboriginal life. Taking part in the Walcheren expedition, he was wounded and returned to England, obtaining extended leave. Accounts differ as to the offence for which he was sentenced to the hulks. One authority credits him with receiving stolen property, and another with taking part in a mutiny at Gibraltar. This much is certain, that he was one of a detachment of prisoners on board the ships Calcutta and Ocean, which carried to Victoria the colonising expedition of Colonel Collins. This expedition, which left England on April 27, 1803, arrived at Port Phillip in the following October and pitched camp just inside Port Lonsdale, on the site of the present waterside township of Sorrento. Collins stayed at this spot for 2 months, but saw nothing to justify the building of a permanent settlement, and towards the end of December, preparations began to be made for moving on to Tasmania. Buckley was only 23 years of age, determined to escape from his convict slavery. His idea of geography were very hazy, and he hoped to be able to walk to Sydney and perhaps to America. He had been cruelly treated after the manner of the times, and getting only more rope's end when he complained. He at length deciding that the bush had no terrors worse than convict life. On December 27th, therefore, with a number of others, he stole away from the camp. Some of them afterwards surrendered themselves in a half-starved condition. 2 or 3 were never heard of again, and Buckley began the strange life which forms so remarkable a story of Australian pioneering. For the first few days he had company, and the party walked steadily around the head of Port Phillip, probably imagining that they were all the time nearing Sydney. When from Swan Island near Kingscliff they again beheld the Calcutta of Sorrento, they were filled with despair. While his companions set off to try and intercept the vessel, which, by the way, they never reached, this young man, almost dying of starvation, stubbornly turned his back on the ship and wandered alone into the bush. Although, as the years went by, his memory failed him, there came a time in his old age when the scenes of his earlier days of wild freedom flashed again across his mental vision. Long and lonely wanderings by the seashore. He told of subsisting on shellfish and water from rocky springs, and suffering intensely from the summer heat, fearing attacks from Aborigines, catching diseases as a result of his precarious life, until at last he found a haven of refuge amongst the native he had once feared. One morning, lying asleep on a rock on the coast, 3 Aborigines found him and marched him off to their camp. Tiring of their prize the next day, however, they abandoned him, and once more he started his lonely peregrinations. Soon afterwards, he found a spear sticking in a mound, and by strange coincidence or special providence, this spear led to his adoption by a neighbouring tribe as the reincarnation of one of their deceased warriors, who had formerly owned that particular weapon. 2 women who discovered him brought the tribe to see the strange creature, as the early Aborigines had a tradition that their chiefs returned as white men. They promptly accepted him as the re-embodiment of a noted warrior, and with great rejoicings made him one of the tribe. In a purely animal way, Buckley lived as one of the tribe. His matrimonial life was checkered with tragic incidents. His first wife given to him proved fonder of a young Aboriginal man, and an outraged community put them both to death. After some years, the white man, gradually darkening by the way, returned to his solitary life by the seashore. A young Aboriginal woman joining him there. But Buckley appears to be a poor lady's man, for another Aboriginal lover bore her away also. Her ultimate fate is unknown. He returned to the tribe later on, but again took to his seaside camp, where for a long time he lived with no companions except 2 adopted children, a blind boy and a girl. He had entirely forgotten his tongue, and with the exception of his lighter coloured skin, he was every way a native. Yet his instincts must have driven him to the shore, there to scan the horizon for shipping. Several times he saw vessels, and once he nearly reached a party which had landed to bury a dead sailor. But in all the 32 years of his strange exile, he never spoke an English word until an accident brought him in touch with Batman's party on July 12, 1835. Some natives had stolen an axe from the Europeans, and fearing retribution, were trying to incite the Aborigines to attack the settlement. Thus Buckley heard about the presence of white people. He visited them and soon recognised that he was not. He visited them and they soon recognised he was not a native, but for some time could not recollect enough of his mother tongue to warn them of their danger or tell them who he was. Restored to European life, Buckley was granted a pardon and became a useful interpreter in the negotiations between Batman and the Aborigines. He helped to build the first house in Melbourne, and when Governor Burke visited the infant settlement, Buckley commanded a native bodyguard or guard of honour and was his guide in 1 or 2 inland trips he made. After 2 years in the township on the Yarra, the wild white man began to be troublesome, perhaps as a result of too much lionising, and the early Victorians were relieved when, in 1837, he took himself off to Hobart. There he was given a government billet and was afterwards pensioned. He married too, in all the odour of sanctuary, not in the free and easy manner of his native life. Before his death in 1856, 76 years of age, Buckley wrote the story of his wanderings, and the character he gave the Aborigines was an exceedingly bad one. Unfortunately, though, he had abundant opportunity for observation. His mind was very little higher in character than theirs, and his opinions are not worth much to the students of the Aboriginal race. The end. That's pretty interesting, this. And then he saw a bunyip as well, and this is a snippet from a book written by John Morgan called The Life and Adventures of William Buckley. Buckley had glimpses of the bunyip down Geelong way. Its back seemed to be covered with dusky grey feathers, its size that of a full-grown calf. The creatures only appear when the weather is very calm and the water smooth. Here on the Barham River, the bunyips were often seen by the natives, who had great dread of them, believing them to have some supernatural power over human beings, so as to the occasion of death, sickness, disease, and such like transformations. Okay, so about the book that John Morgan wrote, known as The Life and Adventures of Buckley. John Morgan wrote it in 1852, and Buckley was illiterate. And so Buckley told him these stories, and it was clearly intended to make money for the insolvent Morgan and Buckley. And a lot of people said that it's the product of Morgan's fertile imagination than the true representation of Buckley's experiences. And also, like, a lot of people said, the Aborigines didn't act like that, and that, this, that, and the other, and they said it was nowhere near what Aborigines act at. But some scholars see it as consistent with modern understandings of Aboriginal social life. Tim Flannery suggested that Buckley's story has been ignored or only mentioned in passing by historians because it is so at odds with the contemporary preconceptions of Aborigines. And Aboriginal studies were only done by archaeological research. They weren't done by people that lived with them. And then Flannery also cites Edward Kerr, an early author of Aboriginal studies, who claimed Morgan's book gave a truer account of Aboriginal life than any work that he'd ever read, which is really interesting. And then we'll get on to the saying, you've got Buckley's chance or you've got Buckley's, which means you've not got no chance or none at all, which I find quite amusing because it's named after Buckley. And so, like, if you've got Buckley's chance, you've got no chance of survival, right? Buckley survived 32 years in the wilds. So he survived. So it's really weird that when you say you've got Buckley's chance, well, you actually have got some, technically, because Buckley survived. And then the term became, you've got Buckley's and none, and that's attributed to, because of you've got Buckley's, but also there was a department store in Melbourne called Buckley and Nunn, Nunn spelled N-U-N-N, and that went bust and broke. And so that's how the term, you've got Buckley's and none, came about. All very interesting stuff. That's it from me. I'll get back to this all next time. Bye.